Hello, I'm a Protection Officer with Shropshire Fire and Rescue Service, and today I'll be taking you through our business education webinar. This is one of a series of webinars that we will be producing. If you have any questions about what you learned today, our contact details are listed at the end of the webinar, or head to our website to contact us.
The aim of this webinar is to give an overview of the legislation. We're going to look at the completion of a fire risk assessment. There are lots of different methodologies for this completion, but we'll concentrate on the 5-step checklist which is produced by the Home Office. We'll have a look at general fire precautions, where these are, what these are and how you can apply them to your premises. We're going to give an insight into human behaviour so that when applying the general fire precautions you know how people will react to a fire. And we're going to give you a look forward to some other webinars that will be available for you to work through if they are appropriate to your business. So the regulatory form order, regulatory form order to give its full title, it can be called the Fire Safety Order or the FSO, came in October 2006, and it brings all workplaces under the fire safety umbrella. It repealed quite a number of different pieces of legislation, and the important thing is it is risk-based or risk assessment based. And it applies to all premises, and that's apart from a single private domestic dwelling. So when the fire safety order was introduced, places like churches, hospitals, schools, where before they weren't really covered by fire safety legislation, these premises now fall within the scope of the fire safety order. So the fire safety order places responsibilities on the responsible person. But who are you? Well, the responsible person will fall into one of these 3 categories. You'll be the employer, so if you pay somebody's wages, then you are the employer. You might be a person who has control of the premises. Now this may be the landlord or the occupier. So for example, the market hall in Shrewsbury has lots of stalls, but the market stall holder does not have control of that premises. That's down to the landlord who has that control. Or you could be the owner of the premises. Now you're going to fall into one of these categories, and when the inspecting officer comes to your premises, they will ask these questions to determine who the responsible person is. Now the regulatory form order is applicable to all relevant persons. So who are relevant persons? Well, any person lawfully on the premises. A key word there is lawfully. There was some discussion when the legislation was being drawn up that if a burglar broke into your premises, you need to ensure his safety. It's clearly nonsense, so the word lawfully was introduced. Now, prior to the fire safety order, legislation only covered employees, but it now includes everyone. So before, it included teachers but not pupils, it included nurses but not patients, and it included a vicar but not his congregation. So any person in the immediate vicinity. So recent fire where stacks of pallets caught fire, a stack was so big that the radiated heat caused about £2 million worth of damage to adjacent properties. Now luckily the fire was during the night, but if it had been during the day, one of the buildings destroyed by the fire was an outdoor shed used by a children's nursery. So those people in that immediate vicinity need to be or at risk from fire. So what do you need to do as a responsible person? Well, you need to do a fire risk assessment. Now these have been a legal requirement since 1997 under the Workplace Fire Precautions legislation, but that was replaced by the Fire Safety Order. And this is what brought in the element of relevant persons. So we're now going to look at what a fire risk assessment should be. Well, it must be suitable and sufficient. It must be carried out by a competent person, and any significant findings should be recorded. It's good practice to record it, but it must be recorded if there are 5 or more employees at one or more premises. Now this is quite a common misunderstanding. So an example, if Mrs. Miggins, who owns a pie shop with 1 employee, she has to do a risk assessment but doesn't need to record it. However, Mrs. Miggins then opens another 4 pie shops with 1 employee in each. This is now 5 shops with 5 employees across the organisation. So now each shop with 1 employee must have a recorded risk assessment for each premises, 5 or more employees. or if there's a licence in force on the premises under another piece of legislation. Again, for those who know Shrewsbury, up from the fire station, there's a large shipping container placed on land next to Quickfit that sells fireworks around about September, October every year. Now, there's only one person working in there, but they have a licence to sell fireworks issued by the local authority. So in this instance, they must have a recorded fire risk assessment. Now, when we talked about relevant persons in the vicinity who may be affected by a fire, it's just across the road from a block of flats and right next to the main railway line from Crewe to Shrewsbury. So people, relevant persons in the vicinity. Now we're just going to play a short video, and this will introduce the 5 steps to risk assessment.
By law, all employers have a responsibility to manage the risk of fire at their organisation's premises. A vital element in meeting this responsibility is carrying out a fire risk assessment. A fire risk assessment is the foundation for all your fire safety measures. It is a process that enables you to check that existing fire safety systems and precautions are effective and appropriate for the risks present, and helps to identify issues that may require attention. It is a legal requirement that the results of a fire risk assessment are recorded if an organisation has 5 or more employees. Even if an organisation employs fewer than 5 people, it still makes sense to record the results as evidence of ongoing fire safety diligence. In small, simple, low-risk premises, the fire risk assessment may be undertaken by the employer with the support of the free guides published by the government. Where risks are higher or buildings more complex, an external expert may be brought in to perform the fire risk assessment. Whichever approach is taken, it must be ensured that the fire risk assessment is suitable and sufficient for the premises and risks involved. So, what is a fire risk assessment and what is its purpose? Put simply, a fire risk assessment is a process that is used to identify possible fire hazards, identify people who could be at risk from fire, reduce the risk from these hazards to an acceptable level, identify further actions that need to be taken to ensure the safety of people on your premises if a fire does break out. Initially, the idea of producing a fire risk assessment might be intimidating. In most cases, however, all that is required is to follow a simple process consisting of 5 stages. These are: identify fire hazards, identify people who are at risk, evaluate the risks, record your findings, review the assessment regularly.
Okay, so that has introduced the 5 steps to risk assessment, and what we'll do now is we're going to look at each step in a little bit more detail to help you get some understanding of what to do. And for each of the steps there's a short video which will help understand what those are. So this is a checklist or a guide available off the government website that outlines these 5 steps, and we're going to concentrate on these. This is what we will use to work through each part with a short video for each section, which will give an overview of what we're trying to achieve. So if we start with step 1, identifying the fire hazards. This is about seeing what can start a fire and what can burn. And as you can see from that checklist there, there is a small section for you to make notes on the side if you use that particular checklist.
When trying to identify fire hazards in any premises, it's worth remembering that 3 things are needed to create a fire: heat, fuel, and oxygen. This is often referred to as the fire triangle. If any one of these 3 is removed, then a fire can't take place. Keeping this in mind when you walk around your premises can help simplify the process of identifying fire hazards, as essentially there are just 3 questions you need to ask. What possible sources of ignition, and therefore heat, are there? What materials might fuel a fire? And how might oxygen help a fire burn? When performing an assessment, you should examine all areas of the workplace, including rarely used storage areas, cellars, roof voids, and outbuildings. If you are responsible for very large or multiple premises, you may find it easier to undertake separate assessments that cover smaller, more manageable areas. Potential sources of heat or ignition will vary enormously depending on the business. They can range from the more obvious risks, such as cooking or hot work like welding, to more subtle dangers, such as lamps placed too close to paperwork in an office environment. Essentially, you are looking for naked flames, sparks, or other potential sources of heat. Fuel is anything that will burn and spread a fire. This covers a wide range of materials. So, when carrying out an assessment, you should be sensible and concentrate on identifying fuels that will ignite fairly easily and which are present in sufficient quantities to spread a fire. As you might expect, the main source of oxygen is simply the air around us. Doors, windows, and the building structure play an important role in restricting airflow to a fire and in limiting the spread of fire and smoke. Hospitals, laboratories, and some industrial premises may have additional sources of oxygen stored in cylinders or piped through fixed systems that also need to be taken into account. The aim of any fire risk assessment is to remove, separate, or reduce these three elements so that fires are less likely to occur.
Okay, so that's the first section. So step 2 then, identify people at risk. Now we're talking about relevant persons that we talked about before. This could be employees, the people in the vicinity, and especially older, more vulnerable adults and any children. So another short video just to cover that section.
In addition to identifying fire hazards, another vital part of any assessment is identifying people who may be at risk if there is a fire. Effectively, this is anyone, including employees, on or near the premises if a fire occurs. Particular attention must be paid to anyone who could be especially at risk. Safety requirements must also ensure the safety of people who are not familiar with the premises, for example, customers, visitors, and contractors. Depending on the work undertaken at your premises, you may need to consider the following people who could be especially at risk. People working alone or outside the usual work situation. This might include cleaners or security staff who are on duty at night. Or anyone likely to spend time in isolated parts of your workplace, basements, outbuildings, warehouses, maintenance workshops, and so on. And anyone less able to leave the premises quickly in an emergency. This can include people with disabilities, elderly people, or people with young children. Members of the public, guests or visitors who will be unfamiliar with your premises must be included. This is especially important when assessing sleeping accommodation, such as hotels or halls of residence.
So it's important there just to think about the people who come into your premises, what they do, where they work, etc. Okay, so we're going to move on to step 3 now. Well, step 3 is now the largest section of the 5 steps. This deals with the general fire precautions, which we'll come on to shortly. And this is where you would see how to manage those risks. If you can eliminate or reduce them, and if you can't eliminate or reduce, how do you protect against them? Now, as you can imagine, this is the biggest section, so this is a slightly longer video, but it does cover the largest area of the 5 steps.
When you have identified the hazards and considered the associated risks on your site, you must take steps to either remove the risks completely, if possible, or put measures in place to reduce risks to an acceptable level. To do this, you need to assess the likelihood that a hazard may result in a fire, eliminate or manage the fire hazards, assess the consequences to the people you have identified, eliminate or minimize the risk to people. Let's look at these 4 steps in a little more detail. Assessing the likelihood of fire from the hazards identified requires that you work through your list of possible hazards and assess the possibility of each one actually resulting in a fire. Don't forget to take into account that many fires are started deliberately, so you have to consider how easy it would be if someone, a member of staff or visitor or an intruder, wanted to deliberately start a fire. Earlier we talked about the 3 things a fire needs in order to start. Eliminating or managing fire hazards is all about controlling these. Usually, this is a matter of trying to keep anything you have identified as combustible well away from any potential heat or ignition source. Let's first of all examine how you might eliminate or reduce some common ignition sources. Try to remove the need for heaters with exposed elements or portable heaters of any sort. Use central heating where possible or fixed convector heaters. Don't store anything close to lights, and if possible replace hot lights with cooler running lights. Ensure that combustible materials are not stored in rooms with electrical equipment like fuse boards or plant. Similarly, combustible or flammable items should never be stored adjacent to boilers or in boiler rooms. Regular portable appliance tests, or PAT testing as it's often called, can help prevent the potential for electrical equipment to become sources of ignition. Likewise, all electrical plants should be regularly checked for damage and safe operation, as should all machinery that might become hot. Have a permit system for hot work, which includes checks during and after work is finished to ensure that no material is left smouldering. Have a smoking policy which only allows smoking in dedicated safe locations away from buildings, stores, and other combustible materials. When looking at eliminating or reducing sources of fuel, good housekeeping plays a vital role. Ensure combustible waste materials are not allowed to build up and that they are kept well away from buildings and boundaries. Bins should be chained or kept in secure compounds. Combustible waste from machines should be removed from the building as often as possible to minimize the risk of it being ignited. Arranging for regular collections of all waste and other combustibles will help reduce the risk of deliberate fire setting. If possible, use dedicated storage areas well away from potential ignition sources. If your stock is easily ignited or highly combustible, consider whether you could reduce the amount held on your premises by ordering smaller quantities more often. If you have to use flammable liquids or gases, only store the minimum at a work area, in appropriate containers and cabinets. Use dedicated safe and controlled storage for all flammable and potentially explosive materials. Wherever possible, these areas should be outside the building. As we saw earlier, fires need a ready source of oxygen if they are to continue to burn. Therefore, restricting, wherever possible, the flow of fresh air is an important step in controlling any fire. All windows and doors should always be closed as part of any locking up procedure, and in the event of a fire evacuation, if it is safe to do so. Fire doors must be checked for correct fit and operation. Damage or poor maintenance can severely limit the time that a door will withstand fire, so they should be inspected regularly and any required remedial work should be carried out promptly. If fire doors do need to be held open, they should be fitted with hold-open devices that release and close the door when the fire alarm sounds. If oxygen or other gas cylinders are kept on the premises, ensure they are in a secure, well-ventilated area. All piped oxygen and other flammable gas systems should be regularly maintained and be fitted with emergency shut-off valves at planned locations, and staff should be trained in their use. So far, we have looked at eliminating or reducing the hazards identified, but the most important element of any fire risk assessment is ensuring that the risk to people is as low as reasonably practicable. Think about the consequences to people if one of the possible scenarios you have considered should occur. How quickly will the alarm be raised? Are there sufficient safe escape routes for everyone who might be in the building to escape? Could a fire hazard block an escape route, and if so, is there an alternative route available? Are there adequate emergency signs, lights and firefighting equipment? Are refuges provided to assist in the evacuation of disabled persons clear of combustible materials, and are telephones and evacuation chairs in good working order? When considering people, it is important that you also think about how employees, visitors, or anyone else on site knows what to do and where to go in an emergency. For some establishments, like care homes, medical centres or schools, you may also have to consider where people will go after an evacuation. Most importantly, provision should be made for people who may have a disability that either prevents them from knowing that an alarm has been raised or restricts their ability to evacuate the premises easily. If a fire should occur, you have to make certain that appropriate fire precautions and procedures are in place to ensure everyone can evacuate safely. Ensure employees are familiar with emergency procedures and escape routes by organising regular fire evacuation drills and through information provided in notices and fire safety training sessions. Suitable personal emergency evacuation plans should be implemented for people who may require additional help in evacuating a building. These plans should include what help is required, who should provide it, any equipment required, and whether any additional staff training is necessary. If you are dealing with customers who make infrequent visits to your premises, then evacuation procedures need to be very clear and accessible, and assistance from staff members or dedicated fire wardens may also be required. Remember, the essential elements in getting people out of a building safely are raising the alarm, clear, dedicated escape routes and exits, good signage and emergency lighting, precise and clear processes and procedures, and regular practice or drills. Many buildings are divided up into separate fire compartments through the use of fire doors and fire-resistant walls and floors. The purpose of these compartments is to restrict fire spread, and it's important that the integrity of these compartments is not breached. Risk assessment should ensure safe compartmentation is maintained, and that any new cabling or pipework between compartments is sealed with an appropriate fire-stopping material. If not already installed, consider whether an automatic fire alarm or fire suppression system should be fitted. By reacting to fires quickly, automatic fire detection and alarm systems provide valuable additional time for evacuation, as do fire suppression systems such as sprinklers, which can help contain or even extinguish fires. Consider any other management procedures, for example, equipment shutdown or security measures that are relevant to your place of work. Ensure existing precautions are adequate and consider what else might need to be done. For example, buildings with large ventilation systems may be fitted with dampers at compartment lines which shut down the airflow through the ducting when the fire alarm is activated. These should be checked regularly by a competent person to ensure they are operating correctly.
Okay, we're about halfway through the webinar now, so feel free to pause, stretch your legs, grab a brew before we move on to the next step.
So that started talk about general fire precautions, as I said, which we'll come on to shortly. But another common deficiency which we find is the storage of combustible material next to the main electrical distribution board. It was noted at the start of that video, and if you look at where your electrical distribution board is, it's probably in a cupboard under the stairs, and that's where people use it as a storage room. So you always end up with that combustible material near an ignition source. Okay, so step 4 then, record, plan and train. So this is where you need to record all this information and how you plan to prevent the fires and how you want to train your staffs. So just a 1-minute video to help you with that.
Once you have performed your assessment, if your company has 5 or more employees, you are obliged to record your findings, including what actions you need to implement. Even if you have fewer than 5 employees, recording the results is a good way of ensuring ongoing fire safety. The record will also be useful if the fire authorities ever visit your premises to review fire safety arrangements. The results from your fire risk assessment should determine what other actions you now need to take. For example, you may need to revise your existing emergency fire plan, implement new processes and procedures, provide and install new safety equipment such as additional fire extinguishers or fire detectors, schedule maintenance routines for equipment, implement test routines for alarm systems and firefighting equipment, disseminate information to staff, contractors and, in multiple occupancy premises, other tenants, and organise additional staff training.
So it's always good practice to record any findings. It helps the fire service evidence that you've actually gone through that process. Okay, so step 5 now, which is the final step, is to review this information on a regular basis. So when anything changes, such as your stock, you stock something different, or your stock levels, so Christmas, your stock levels might go up. So that's an opportunity to review. So just another short video to round that off.
We now come to the 5th step of any fire risk assessment. Once you have completed an assessment and implemented the results and recommendations, you need to regularly review it. For most businesses, this will be every 12 months. However, if the premises or parts of the premises are of high fire risk, you should consider more frequent reviews. Initially, you should evaluate whether any risk management measures you have introduced are working. Reviews should also be performed for any significant changes to the premises. For example, if there's a change in the quantity or nature of a hazardous material already present, or there are building alterations, new processes, or equipment installations. Similarly, if there are significant changes to the number or location of staff, visitors, or other people expected to be present, this should again trigger a review. Before we finish, you should also consider if you require specialist help in carrying out your risk assessment. This might be the case if you use large volumes of flammable substances or have atmospheres that may contain explosive dust. If you deal with large numbers of the public, then you should again consider experienced professional help to ensure that all risks are minimized. If you have any doubts about whether you are sufficiently competent or qualified to carry out an assessment due to the specialist nature of the work your company undertakes, you should consider professional help or attend a professionally run course.
So that's the 5 steps and information on each. So we talked earlier in step 3 about general fire precautions. And if we take those definitions, they can look quite daunting, but if we highlighted the key words, reduce fire and fire spread, adequate means of escape, can they be safely and effectively used, means for fighting fire, means for detecting that fire and giving warning, actions to be taken to train employees and mitigate the effects of fire. So what we'll do now is we'll try to give you some additional information on general fire precautions and how they might work in your building. So we can break the general fire precautions down into the following areas. Structural compartmentation, which was mentioned in one of the videos, fire doors to protect an escape route, final exit doors to outside, and those are not to be confused with fire doors. Okay, fire doors are protecting an escape route, a fire exit is that final exit to outside of the building. Escape routes, these are the ones that are protected by the fire doors and the lead to that final exit. Fire alarm and detection, fire alarm systems, so detecting a fire and giving warning, emergency lighting and signage. So we give some examples of each of these to help with applying the general fire precautions in your premises. Structural compartmentation, it was mentioned in the video, examples on the left there where some work has been carried out, such as venting of pipe work goes through the wall. So if you have work carried out, always check afterwards that any compartmentation that has been breached has been filled correctly with appropriate fire stopping material, as it's shown on the right there. This kind of stuff often goes unseen as it tends to be above false ceilings or in voids, so it's out of sight, out of mind. So it's important when carrying out your fire risk assessment to know where your compartmentation is so that you can check that it hasn't been compromised. Okay, fire doors then, and so these are doors that prevent the spread of fire and smoke from one area to another. They can protect escape routes from a fire in a room, and they can be recognised by having the blue circle, fire door keep shut on. So they would also have what we call intermittent strips around the door to maintain the integrity of the door if there is a fire behind it, and they would be fitted around the frame, around any glazing and any openings in the door, as is shown on the left where those red lines are. So fire doors, do they work? Well, let's take some examples here. So the picture on the right, you can see the fire doors has a blue circle, a substantial fire through that door, but no damage on this side of the fire door. So it's obviously protected this side. On the left, you can see the intermittent strips and smoke seals around the frame of the door. The white part is the intermittent strip, and if heat gets to that, then it swells and seals the door. But before heat gets to the door, there's a large amount of smoke that will be produced. And that cold smoke seal is the black line. It can be a brush or a piece of rubber, will prevent smoke escaping through that door, and therefore they are protecting the escape route. Say fire exits and escape routes then. So when we look at escape routes and fire exits, this is an escape route that leads to that final exit. And in the pictures you can see that these routes are blocked by stock. So once you've designated these routes, make sure that they remain clear and unobstructed so they are available to use at all material times. Now when you carry out your checks of these escape routes, when you reach that fire exit, that final door, before you get to outside to a place of safety, always make sure that you open that fire exit door and make sure that it's clear on the other side. If you can see this picture on the left, you can see that someone has pushed a wheelie bin up against the fire exit. So although you may have made sure that that route inside is clear, when you get to that door it may not open because it's blocked. Then on the right, the escape route has lots of storage of combustible materials. So again, that escape route is compromised. So it's always important to do these checks inside as well as outside. And then just a couple of final pictures there to show one on the left, obviously compromised, one on the right, nice and clear and available to use. Okay, fire detection and warning then. So by far the best detector of a fire is the human eye. So you must have some form of detecting a fire and giving warning that a fire has started. And this will depend on the size of your premises and the work that's carried out. So small open plan single story, a shout of fire might work. Larger, more complex premises may need automatic fire detection. As a general rule, think about, can a fire start in an unoccupied part of the premises and go undetected to the point where the fire is so big that it affects the means of escape from the premises? So think about your premises and think about those unoccupied areas and how you would know if a fire started in that area. Okay, emergency lighting then. Again, dependent on the size of your premises, your fire risk assessment should identify the level of emergency lighting required. As a simple rule, turn the lights off in the dark, see if you can find your way out easily. If not, then you need some form of emergency lighting. So small premises, torches could be used. Large, more complex, then fixed emergency lighting would be required. The small torches in the plug sockets and handheld torches were used extensively in small B&Bs and holiday lets when the fire safety order came in. But over time, these have been replaced by fixed lighting units because the torches kept going missing. In a small B&B, you may only need 1 or 2 emergency lights as opposed to 7 torches in all the bedrooms. And those torches need replacing when they get pinched, or they need to replace the batteries every 6 months. So over time, it becomes more cost effective to fit fixed emergency lighting. Firefighting equipment then. So you need to have a way of fighting a small fire. If you don't have sprinklers in your premises, then portable firefighting equipment will be required. Sprinklers are only really put into very large open plan areas to control the fire size. But portable equipment will be required. Again, dependent on the size of your premise and the type of business carried out will determine the type of extinguisher for the risk. Now, staff will need to be trained in their use, but that level of training will be up to you as the responsible person. It could be as simple as putting a fire extinguisher on the table and saying, this is a fire extinguisher, it says on the side how to use it, but making sure that they can evacuate the premises safely and not put themselves in danger. Okay, escape signage. So all signs must be to the required standard, which is the pictogram. That's just the running person. There's two standards that are available. We've got the British standard, which you can see on the picture there on the left, and the European standard, which is on the right. Now the British standard has the running person in the door, and it has supplementary wording, and the European standard has the running person outside of the door. It may have the supplementary wording and it may not. Now both standards are acceptable, but what we say is don't mix and match. Okay, have one standard and stick to that. So do you need them? Again, if you have one way in and one way out, a small shop, then probably no. If you have multiple ways in and alternative ways out, then yes. Another simple rule, which is in the British standard, you should be able to stand at any point in the building and see that one way in or one way out, or a fire exit sign directing you to the nearest available fire exit. Okay, emergency action plan then. This is emergency action plan will form the basis of your staff training. It will tell staff how to raise the alarm if you discover a fire, how you will be warned, how to safely evacuate the building, and there are signs pointing to the nearest exit and where to assemble. Now this can be a simple fire action notice, or it could be a more detailed document or a plan dependent on the size of your premises. Fire safety training and drills. So as we said, this is based on your emergency action plan and would be carried out at regular intervals. So for example, when you're first employed, when you have an increase in risk, changes in working practices. It should be repeated periodically. We recommend 6 monthly for sleeping accommodation and 12 monthly in all other places. Now, any training must be recorded as evidence that the staff have been told what to do in the event of fire. It can be easy when something goes wrong for someone to say, no, you never told me I had to do that. But if you can produce a training record that shows what they were told and when, and you can say, well, you were told what to do and you signed that training record to say that you understood. So it's evidence of that adequate fire safety training. So all of these systems that you've put in place now need to be properly maintained. So your fire alarms need to be tested, emergency lightings are in working order, the escape routes are clear. Those final exit doors are openable during winter months because they are external doors. They can swell and become difficult to open. So it's important to keep checking them on a regular basis. The fire doors that protect the escape routes, that have those intermittent strips and smoke seals, make sure they are closing correctly and close fitting into the frame. If fire doors are held open for any reason with automatic hold open devices or releases, make sure they're working because holding them open can weaken the springs and the self closers may need adjusting from time to time. Okay, signage, firefighting equipment, it all needs checking on a regular basis, and importantly to record the tests and any faults that you find. And when you rectify those faults, you need to record that they've been rectified. It's all evidence that a suitable system of maintenance is in place. And key there is, remember, you are responsible if your fire safety equipment fails due to poor maintenance. Okay, what do we do now then? So when you've done all of that, what do you do? As it said in the videos, provide that information to your employees. The significant findings of the fire risk assessment, the preventative and protective measures, which are the general fire precautions we've just talked about. Let your staff know that fire door is here for a reason. Keep it closed. This escape route and fire exit should be kept clear and unobstructed. You need to let them know this. If you have dangerous substances on the premises, your staff need to know how to manage these and what procedures you have in place to deal with an emergency. And importantly, if you have an employee of a child under 18, then all this information should be provided to the parent of a child. We talk about cooperation and coordination. Anyone who's in a multi-occupied building must cooperate with each other to let them know of risks in your occupancy that could affect the other occupier. So for example, in a factory, you've got two occupiers. One side makes bricks and the other side makes fireworks. There is obviously a significant risk from the fireworks factory that the brick makers would want to know about. So it's important to cooperate with each other, make sure that everyone's aware of the risks that your other occupiers pose to each other. Okay, some information then, additional information available to you. There's a short guide to making your premises safe from fire. The Do You Have Paying Guests is devised to help small B&Bs and guest houses to comply with the order. They never fell within the scope of fire safety legislation before 2006, and so that guide was developed to assist them. There are also 12 separate guides available from the government website that cover different types of premises, specific ones that deal with disabled persons and outdoor events. So lots of different types. Your type of premises, you'll have a guide available to you to look at. Okay, just a final thought then. When you've done all of this and everything is in place, have a thought about human behaviour. How do people react in a fire? How do your staff and customers react in a fire? Well, you think you know, but let's take a look at this short video to give you an understanding of human behaviour.
People don't do what we expect them to do, especially in fires. What we're looking at is an off licence. It's an ordinary day and the security camera is overlooking the shop itself. One customer leaves, another customer remains. Now this chap that's walking in is intent on thieving some sweets. The guy in the background has just picked up a piece of paper, ignited it and throws it into that display by the shop window door. He runs off, and the idea is that the girl behind the counter will be pulled away to put the fire out and the child nicks some sweets while she's doing it. However, it doesn't quite happen that way. What's actually happening now is you can't see it, but that flame is beginning to grow in both the upper part of that display and the lower. This customer walks in and sees the fire on the display. What does he do about it? Nothing. The gang of kids that are waiting for the sweeties now do a runner, and you can see on the left hand side where the flames are beginning to flicker on both the upper and lower levels of that display. Now the gentleman is still seeing that particular flame glowing over there, but still has said nothing. He's standing in the queue waiting to be served. And now he says he's beginning to grow. It's about time, excuse me, but the display's on fire. And the girl in front of him assists in that statement. So the girl goes off to get a fire extinguisher from behind the counter. Meanwhile, some kids who've got their mother with them gather at the front of the shop there to look at the fire. Absolutely oblivious of any danger. And so are the people in the shop who are still waiting to be served. The girl comes out with a carbon dioxide extinguisher. Another customer has just entered and says he wants to give a hand. And if you look closely on the left-hand side, when she operates it, she fires it into her face. Here she goes, fires it off into her face. See, there you go. He stands back, and so does another boy that's come in. It's got nothing to do with what was going on with regards to theft, whilst the girl stands back with the fire extinguisher and fans the flames with it. Meanwhile, the children and the mother have left to stand outside the shop. Now, that's the only way in and the only way out of this shop, and the fire's beginning to grow. The girl behind the counter has now handed the carbon dioxide extinguisher over to another customer. The women have got worried by the smoke and the flame and have decided to leave. What has happened now is that the customer left with the fire extinguisher has disappeared. The boy was going to have a go, but he thinks that that's not right for him either. And the other customer's been out the back of the shop, helped himself to 2 bottles of scotch and walks out. It's round about this time that the temperature at head height is about 300 degrees centigrade, and the smoke is beginning to build such that you wouldn't be able to survive in this particular atmosphere. And just so that you understand the full gravity of the situation, those customers only just managed to get out the shop with seconds to spare. It's round about this time that survival in the shop would become negative.
So that's quite a powerful video on human behaviour and how people react in a fire. A good point there about staff training about how to operate a fire extinguisher when she set it off in her face. It's also worth considering that when we talked before about a small premises, a shout of fire as a way of raising the alarm, in that scenario it didn't work quite as well as a detector would have. So something to bear in mind when considering the level of fire precautions. It certainly is not uncommon for fires to start and people to ignore them. So if you take nothing away from this, tell your staff if they discover a fire to raise the alarm.
Okay, that's the end of the main session. Just so you're aware, we are making available some other short seminars that may be more specific to your premises.
So if you're having an audit from the fire service soon, the fire safety audit process will explain what to expect from that audit and what possible enforcement actions and things that we may ask as part of that audit process. Business continuity, that looks at the risk from arson and some preventative measures to ensure your business continue to thrive and to grow. If your premises does have large and complex fire alarm systems, then there's a webinar on unwanted fire signals, which will explain how to manage that system and how to reduce nuisance alarms disrupting your business. And finally, remember, it's your responsibility as the responsible person to ensure you are compliant with the fire safety order. Now, if you do have any questions, there's an email address there with a telephone number. Ask for the Duty Fire Safety Officer, and they will be able to assist you with any questions that may be more specific to your premises. Thank you for watching.